Hi, I'm Steve Sanetti, President of the National Shooting Sports Foundation, the trade association for the firearms, ammunition, hunting, and shooting sports industry. This is a critically important time for all firearms owners and, of course, for our industry. Legislation that would severely restrict firearms ownership has been introduced in Congress and in many state legislatures. And if passed, this legislation would have negative and long-lasting effects on our industry and the law-abiding firearms owners of America who hunt, target shoot, collect, and own firearms for personal and home protection. In working to defeat this legislation, our strength lies in our passion for our firearms freedoms and in being able to respond forcefully, yet respectfully, with accurate information. Whenever possible, we must impress upon those willing to listen that real solutions to the criminal misuse of firearms don't lie in gun or magazine bans, but rather in efforts to fix the current retail background check system and to limit access to firearms by unauthorized persons. The National Shooting Sports Foundation is the place that you can turn to acquire accurate information about federal and state legislation and many other issues related to the industry, safety, hunting, and shooting. We offer many ways to stay informed, including background papers on key issues, newsletters, press releases, legislative alerts, and frequent posts to our blog. The place to start is at our website, nssf.org, or by just talking to an NSSF representative. So now, let's take a closer look at the issues and what's really at stake. The NSSF believes that only by focusing on real solutions can society help reduce the chances of violence and the criminal misuse of firearms. One thing we can do right now is to begin to make badly needed improvements to the National Instant Background Check System. We call this Fix NICS. The NSSF has outlined a Fix NICS initiative that will help bring all appropriate mental health and other records, such as restraining orders, into the NICS system. Fixing NICS must be among the nation's highest priorities so we can further prevent prohibited persons from purchasing firearms for criminal purposes. Regarding so-called universal background checks, or background checks that extend beyond retail sales or to private transfers, such as a father passing on a favorite hunting rifle to a son, our big concern is one shared by millions of firearms owners: that enforcing checks of used firearms transfers between private individuals will lead to the creation of a national registry of firearms, something that Congress has expressly prohibited. In addition, the current background check system would need to be greatly expanded at huge cost to handle the additional checks. Canada is actually in the process of dismantling its expensive and inefficient rifle and shotgun registry because it takes up police time better used elsewhere. We also have concerns related to the woeful lack of prosecutions of persons flagged by NICS as being prohibited from purchasing a firearm, as well as concerns about imposing on firearms retailers increased regulatory burdens and exposure to liability for merchandise they didn't even sell. Another way to help prevent firearms misuse is to deter unauthorized access to firearms stored in the home. And this includes access by children, at-risk persons, and those not legally qualified to possess a firearm. Given what we know at this time, if the mother of the Sandy Hook school shooter, whom she knew to be at risk, had stored her firearms correctly, the Newtown tragedy could have been prevented without any additional gun control laws. The NSSF has been a leader for 50 years in promoting firearm safety education nationwide. In response to the events in Newtown, we will be expanding our nationally recognized Project Child Safe program, which has already distributed over 35 million firearm safety kits and locks, to further emphasize that gun owners must take steps to ensure that their firearms cannot be accessed by at-risk individuals. And this may require gun owners to use a gun safe or other appropriate security device when the firearm is not in use, and which is resistant to tampering by an adult. The NSSF supports legislation that will provide a sales tax exemption on the purchase of any gun storage safety device, such as a gun safe, gun cabinet, cases, or other locking devices. Yet another real solution is simply to enforce our existing laws so that individuals who illegally possess firearms are prosecuted and receive stiff and even mandatory sentences. We know it works. Look at New York City's crackdown on the illegal possession of firearms and how that has contributed to the city's historic decrease in violent crime. Our Don't Lie for the Other Guy campaign exists to remind both possible purchasers and sellers that if someone buys a gun for another individual who can't do so legally, both the buyer and the seller face up to a $25,000 fine and almost 10 years in jail. Yet this is meaningless unless those felonies are prosecuted to the fullest allowable extent. At the top of the list of some proposed solutions that will do little to deter crime and violence, but would make it illegal to sell America's most popular rifle model, is renewing the ban on so-called assault rifles. And we strongly oppose a ban on semi-automatic rifles because such legislation is overreaching and unwarranted. Millions and millions of these rifles are owned by law-abiding, responsible persons who use them for target shooting, hunting, and home protection. And these owners hurt no one. Several studies, including one by the U.S. Department of Justice, have shown that the decade-long ban on so-called assault rifles did not reduce crime. And since that ban expired in 2004, violent crime has continued to decline dramatically. Consider that a National Institute of Justice report says, quote, "An assault weapons ban is unlikely to have an impact on gun violence," close quote. To suggest that these rifles are good for nothing but killing people, as Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy has said, is an insult to the millions of law-abiding citizens who own and use them safely and properly. Anyone who says such a thing is calling these good people of America murderers. And that's not the way to engage in a constructive dialogue about solutions to violence in our society. Nor is it a way to gain support from gun owners. Even with millions of these rifles purchased, about 4 million in the last 10 years, they are rarely used in crime. In Connecticut, for example, only 2 homicides in 7 years were committed with rifles of any kind before the tragic school shooting. Weapons such as knives, clubs, and even hands and feet are used far more often than rifles to commit homicides. That's a fact. And let's not help those who would ban these rifles. Please don't refer to them as assault weapons or assault rifles. They aren't. We encourage use of the term modern sporting rifle to describe them because it reflects the widespread sporting use of these semi-automatic rifles by responsible owners. To further explain the correct terminology, assault weapon is a political term applied to certain firearms based solely on cosmetic features. So under proposed legislation, a semi-automatic rifle that can accept a detachable magazine can be perfectly legal to own unless it also has a cosmetic feature such as a pistol grip or an adjustable stock, in which case it would be banned from being sold. And an assault rifle is, by technical definition, capable of automatic fire. It's a machine gun. In contrast, semi-automatic rifles, which have been around for more than 100 years, fire just 1 round with each pull and release of the trigger. Now granted, the look of these rifles creates a lot of confusion. I'm from a generation that grew up thinking a rifle had a wood stock and blued steel. So I understand the look of many modern sporting rifles might be off-putting to some people. But to the younger generation of firearms owners and purchasers, the 35 to 40-year-old group, this is what a rifle looks like today. It's what they want to own and shoot, legitimately, for pleasure, sporting purposes, hunting, target shooting. And millions of them do so, and they don't hurt a fly. When it comes to limiting magazine capacity, I refer again to the decade-long so-called assault weapons ban. It restricted magazine capacity to 10 rounds, but it did not reduce crime, a conclusion reached by both the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and the Urban Institute. And when it comes to purchasing a firearm for personal and home defense, civilians naturally look to law enforcement and the types of firearms they rely on to protect themselves and the public as a guide to what equipment they should purchase. Just like the police, they can't discount the possibility of multiple assailants or missed shots, or the possibility of requiring more than one hit to stop somebody threatening the family. This isn't Hollywood. Remember that law enforcement made the switch to semi-automatic pistols and rifles that accept magazines that carry more rounds, approximately 15 in the case of pistols and 20 to 30 for rifles, because this standard equipment helps deter the bad guys. Law-abiding citizens exercising their constitutional right of self-defense should have access to the same type of equipment for the protection of their families. There have also been a number of proposals to restrict the type and amount of ammunition that law-abiding citizens can purchase, or to impose severe taxes on ammunition. We think this is just wrong. Today's target shooter typically shoots many thousands of rounds at the target range every year, and again, they harm no one. We don't think law-abiding citizens should be penalized for enjoying the shooting sports as they are enjoyed today. We're a technology-loving society, so you see a lot of stories about owner recognition technology, sometimes called smart gun technology. This theoretically allows only one designated person to fire a gun. But despite millions of dollars in government and private research funding dedicated over a decade to developing this technology to see if it's feasible, it just isn't there yet. Now, that being said, the NSSF isn't opposed to the development of this technology. We're opposed to mandating its use before the technology has been proven to be reliable and safe. Virtually all owner recognition systems have to rely on batteries. And this leads to the question of what happens when the battery fails. And as anybody who's ever tried to use a flashlight or a cell phone knows, batteries fail at the worst possible time. And then the question becomes, does the firearm not operate in a moment of dire need because the battery's dead? This is unacceptable. Or does the firearm default to operable mode, which means it'll work and it defeats the single user feature? Neither alternative is acceptable because either battery failure mode can cost lives. Though not opposed to this technology, we have serious reservations about the entire concept of single user firearms from a safety standpoint. Firearm safety begins and ends with the user of the firearm. That person must know how the firearm operates and must be able to check and see if it's loaded or not at any time, including prior to storing a firearm and when it's removed from storage. A big concern is that owner recognition technology could create a false sense of security, that the technology would protect the users and others from firearms misuse. For example, will the owners of so-called smart guns become lax in gun safety habits and leaving lying about in their homes, loaded, where unauthorized persons, including children, might access them? It's important to note that law enforcement and the military and even anti-gun groups are opposed to this technology. And finally, don't forget, this discussion about owner recognition technology shouldn't obscure the fact that the means to appropriately secure firearms from unauthorized persons already exists right now, with locking devices supplied as original equipment voluntarily by firearms manufacturers, or by choosing from a wide variety of safes, storage cabinets, lockable boxes, and gun locks at the point of sale. Countless millions of these devices are in use, and as a result, firearms accidents have fallen dramatically during the last decade and are now involved in less than 1% of all fatal accidents in this nation, well below fires, poisoning, and drowning. So to sum up, the NSSF believes that in order to reduce violence and criminal misuse of firearms in America, we have to focus on real solutions, fixing the background check system, preventing unauthorized access to firearms, not banning firearms and magazines. I encourage you to use these facts when contacting your elected officials to oppose restrictive anti-firearms legislation. And I want you to know that the NSSF stands with you in this fight. We have engaged all of our resources to help protect your firearms and your right to lawfully and responsibly enjoy hunting and the shooting sports. Please check out our website at nssf.org to get more in-depth information about these and many other topics. You'll need to be fully armed with the facts in this important fight. Thank you.